first person I met was Monsieur Berthier, who had established himself in my room, furious at being left at Breda, and declaring he would send in his resignation. In vain I talked to him. I could not calm him. Presently, I, too, became angry and told him to go away because he tired me. Happily, he obeyed this behest immediately, but did not expect the same fate was in store for him on the morrow. We sat down to dinner, at which the Emperor expressed great dissatisfaction with his quarters, so as he could not lay the blame on any of us, his wrath fell upon the dinner. At each dish he remarked, "What a disgusting stew! If only there were a leg of mutton." This was brought to him. Then he said, "If only there was some salad." That too was brought. When he saw that the same thing happened each time, he retired to bed. What amused me most was the Duchess de Montebello, who was bursting with laughter in spite of the signs I made to her. She is really not courtier enough for the country in which we live. Besides, she has one great fault, which will tell against her. She's much too attached to me. We all retired to our rooms, determined to sleep the whole of the next day. The King and Queen of Westphalia found fair quarters, but without beds or chairs. The Prince of Neuchâtel, a room without any glass to the window. He was therefore obliged to use his papers to keep out the draft. The Viceroy arrived too late for dinner and was quartered on an invalid who suffered with dreadful catarrh and who for supper gave him hot lemonade and bread, saying as he presented the glass, "I cannot offer you a better. It is the one out of which I drink myself." Consequently, the Viceroy was obliged to drink from it. I went to bed with the firm intention of not being wakened the next day. Vain hope! The Emperor, who apparently did not find his lodgings sufficiently attractive, mounted his horse at 4 o'clock and decided while riding to depart at 8 and to leave one set of attendants here. The confusion caused by this unexpected departure was so great that all the luggage was left behind. The Emperor refused to wait and nearly left the King and Queen of Westphalia behind. However, they arrived just as we were embarking on the canal. The Viceroy had not found his quarters sufficiently comfortable and so had slept elsewhere. Apparently, he told his valet to call him late in the morning. The man had taken away his uniform and locked the door from the outside. Happily, the room was on the ground floor, so the Viceroy jumped from the window onto the square in a somewhat light attire, to the great astonishment of the inhabitants. I do not know who was malicious enough to tell this story to the Emperor, but he was so furious the Viceroy was sent back to Paris on our return to Brussels. At 8 o'clock, we proceeded through the town in our carriages and passed close by the trading port in which a great many vessels were lying. We embarked at the spot where the canal joins the Scheldt and went downstream for an hour in some charming gondolas. The Scheldt here is more than a league in breadth, and its water already tidal. The weather was very fine and calm, so our boats moved smoothly. Away to the right was the foreland of the Isle of Toulon. The sea air gave us such an appetite that we ate a cold lunch. I do not know what evil genius put this idea into our heads, but everybody became ill. The Queen of Westphalia and myself were the least inconvenienced because we had taken the precaution of immediately going into the fresh air, but the Emperor, the Viceroy, and the Duc d'Estrées were violently sick. They therefore determined to disembark at 10 o'clock upon the Isle of Swede, Bivland, without ascertaining if there were any carriages there to convey us to the other side. After making inquiries, the Duc d'Estrées at last found us 2 or 3 peasant conveyances, which were neither carts nor carriages, and to which 2 horses were harnessed. These were so high that a ladder was needed to get into them, and so narrow that 2 people could scarcely sit at rest. They had no springs, consequently were very hard, and to complete our misfortunes, were occupied by a number of very disagreeable small intruders. The Duc d'Estrées mounted his horse and preceded us to arrange for boats to be prepared for us on the other side of the island. The carriage in which the Duchess de Montebello rode with the Comtesse de Liverstein and the Viceroy capsized. It was broken into 1,000 pieces. He alighted on his feet. The Duchess escaped with a tumble, but the Comtesse de Liverstein was dragged along by the horses and her elbow badly injured. The island of Sweet Beefland is really charming. On the road we passed through fruit gardens and little woods of limes, elms, and willows interspersed with small villages. In the little town of Ghost, we were agreeably surprised to find carriages excellent compared with those we just left. After passing through the town of Zeeburg, which is rather pretty, we arrived at the other side of the island of Hoopfort. There we embarked in a packet boat and again went down the Scheldt. We saw many porpoises, a very curious fish having the head of a pig, while its body is quite round. It rolls on its back on the surface of the water, and in this way makes a great deal of progress. In a short time, we disembarked at 4 o'clock at the head of Fort Ramschen, where the best carriages of the town of Middleburg were waiting for us. I do not exaggerate when I say they must have been constructed at least 150 years ago. We were so famished that we ate 2 large military loaves, which some soldiers brought us. The Emperor inspected the town of Flushing on horseback, while the Queen of Westphalia and I continued our journey to Middleburg. The island of Walcheren is just as fine as Sweet Beefland. Should one, however, be tempted to settle there, one would soon pay very dearly. The air is so pestilential that every year during the month of September and October, there are the most frightful epidemics of malarial fever. Consequently, the inhabitants seldom live to the age of 50. Their complexions are yellow and livid. The emperor is obliged to relieve the large garrison every 3 months, and yet 2/3 of the soldiers are always ill when they leave. It is essential for them to drink wine while they're in the island. We continued our road along a very high dike as far as Middleburg, which we reached at 5 o'clock, and were lodged in a house belonging to the emperor, which had formerly been a convent. It had been decorated and furnished for our reception, hence the papers were still quite fresh. I felt some repugnance, however, at sleeping in the bed in which some English had died about 2 years previously. I'm so timid about illness that I imagined that I could still scent the odor of death in the town. It is said more than 30,000 English perished at Middleburg during that epidemic. My apartment looked upon a courtyard filled with fine trees. We were entertained with some delightful military music, which I would have listened to with pleasure had it not prevented my sleeping. My attendants ultimately arrived at 3 o'clock, so I was able at last to go to bed, but they brought me no change of clothing. Consequently, the emperor will be obliged to see me in the same dress and chemise until we leave here. I resigned myself to the situation without any fuss, but the Queen of Westphalia was inconsolable. Her women arrived 24 hours after us, so she made the unfortunate Comtesse de Liverstein stay up all night in the antechamber to make tea for her. And when it was brought, she scolded her, would not drink it, and cried with rage. It requires an angel from heaven to put up with her. I know very well what I should have done if I had been the lady in waiting.